final time. My name's Sassy Holmes, and I'm the Programme Officer here at the Brontë Parsonage Museum. Thank you so much for being with us today and this whole weekend. It's been such a fantastic festival, and we've had such a lovely community of people grow and learn and share, and it's been fantastic to produce and host, so thank you all. I'm the host for this last event today, and today we're kind of bringing it back to the Brontës, and we're bringing it back to the force of nature, that is weather. Whether you're looking out the windows of the parsonage on a blistering day, or you're thinking about Cathy on the moors, weather is really integral to the Brontë story, not only just within their novels and poetry, but also with their lives. And we've got an artist here who has been studying this for a long time. Rebecca Chesney, in October 2011, created a project in the parsonage called Hope's Whisper, where we had a digital weather station in the garden of the Brontë Parsonage Museum, collecting data for the year. And through historical, contemporary weather records and cross-referencing that with the novels, Rebecca really created this amazing art installation that explored the influence of weather, both in the Brontes' novels and their lives, but also weather at the time in 2011. So 2023 has been the Brontes' Year of the Wild, and we've returned to that project, excitingly. We've been looking at weather and how people experience weather and how that makes them feel over this last year in our weather book that we have out in the museum. So today we're joined by Rebecca Chesney, reflecting on weather, Haworth over the years, and really looking at how things have changed as well, and what that means for climate change, sustainability, and the way that Haworth's landscape looks today. So thank you. Welcome, Rebecca. A little round of applause for Rebecca.
Thank you very much.
How are you today, first of all?
Really good.
Good, yes. Yeah. Brilliant.
And really pleased to be invited.
What's your experience of the weather today?
Very different from yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I came across yesterday on the train and the bus, and it was beautiful. And then came to the event last night, and then we ended up in the field at the back, and we're kind of watching stars. The clouds came over a little bit at the end. And then today, of course, is a very different day. I've been dodging showers and yeah, I fancied walking up to Top Withings this morning, but there was no chance. I kind of knew by yesterday with the forecast that I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah, I always feel like it's a different climate in Haworth. I live in Leeds, and so I dress for one weather, and by the time I'm here, it's a completely different atmosphere. Yeah. It's brilliant. Let's start at the beginning. Let's go to Hope's Whisper, your project.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about how you were commissioned for the project, and a little bit about it?
So it was the art officer at the time, Jenna Holmes, approached me, and we sort of started talking about me doing a project with the museum, probably in about 2010, and I think she was aware of my work because I was doing a really big project at Yorkshire Sculpture Park, so maybe that was, I'm not sure I ever asked her how did she know about my work. Yeah. But my work is about landscape, but also how we perceive landscape, and what do we want from our landscape, what do we expect of it, or what do we think of it, and how that might actually differ from reality. So she called me up and said, did I want to do a project about the Brontes? And you know, it's like you want to go yes before she's finished the sentence. But, you know, I was like, well, you know, maybe I'll think about it. No, I didn't do it. No, I said yes straight away. But at the time, I didn't then confess I'd never read any Brontes. So I came across, started sort of exploring. But obviously, from the very, very beginning, before I was even sort of properly invited, started reading the Brontë novels. And and she left the brief open, you know, like you do what you want. And which is always a treat, obviously. And it was while reading the novels, but then also coming to the parsonage, and like you've said, every time you come it's different. Like the journey is different, my time here was different. And of course that combination, it was like, actually, they mention the weather a lot. They do mention the weather a lot, and they use it in lots of different ways to set a scene, or emphasize emotion, or just practicalities. Like so they use it in lots and lots of different ways.
Yeah. And
I then thought, maybe that's what I do too. Would it be possible? So one of my first ideas was, would it be possible to set up a weather station here, and with the data collected, could I find quotes or passages from the Brontë text that were so detailed in a way, because I mean, they're fictional, but some of them are so detailed, it'll tell you what month it is, what day it is, almost what the weather is. Could I marry up, overlap, like a day from 2011 and one of the Brontë texts? And I was going to do them as drawings, but of course, to gather that data, you have to, so for one drawing, you have to read all the novels. Or I chose, I chose one from each of the sisters to concentrate on. And of course, gather data for a year. So it's like, although the outcome is, I did about 5 drawings in the end that were possible to kind of marry up. So each drawing, I suppose, takes a year, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, one of the things when I first started the project, I started with Wuthering Heights, and then it was while I was halfway through Jane Eyre that was when the idea of weather kind of came up. But I hadn't been noting all the weathers as I was going along, so I had to reread them to then sort of re-look at it through the weather lens. Yeah. So I read all the novels in the end, but really I concentrated on, like with Anne, it was 10 and 12 Fell Hole.
The big 3.
The big 3. Yeah. The big 3 hitters. Yeah.
Brilliant. And with some of your findings, you kind of presented those in quite a lot of different visual ways.
Yeah, so because it was over a year, of course that's a treat, isn't it, as an artist. I could go in sort of all sorts of different directions. And of course I was looking at their writing and fictional writing and their imagination. But at the same time, I was looking at their personal lives through their letters. Yeah. And of course, that ends up being about the weather in relation to health. And of course, sort of having access to the letters and reading them. Because at first I was like, well, they weren't that prolific. Yeah. Like, I'll get through the novels fine. And then, which wasn't true anyway, you found, I know you're all Brontë people and all the rest of it, but I found like Villette and Shirley a little bit.
I think a lot of Brontë people will agree with you that they are a little bit.
I haven't finished the sentence, but you know what I'm saying. It was a bit like, oh God, I said I'd read all these. You know what I mean? Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I apologise if that was your favourite. And then, so that was some of my naivety, I suppose, in thinking, well, there's not that many novels. But then, of course, they were like, I mean, there was a lot of poetry. I mean, there was like huge amounts of poetry. And then, of course, their letters was then a completely different thing, and huge amounts of letters. And of course, that was shifting it into that was more personal, and you feel like you've been given access to something very private as well. Like when we write letters, I mean, you'd be horrified if an email goes astray, don't you? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, so in a way, it was invaluable, but you did feel like it's an honour to be able to get access to this. But of course, they note each other's health and the health of, deteriorating or picking up, or then, of course, then losing a sibling, and then the pain sort of connected to that did come into the project quite a bit. Yeah.
Was there anything during your research that really surprised you, whether that was about the data that you collected or anything that you read?
So when I started reading the letters, Anne Dinsdale from the museum said I should read the Babbage report. And if you don't know what that is, I've brought some of it. So it was I might read a little bit from it, just so, in case you don't know what it is.
Yeah, sounds good. Go for it.
Okay, so sort of in relation to the health of the Brontes, the Babbage report was written in 1850, so I think we've already lost Emily and Anne and Branwell, haven't we? So it's sort of written during that time. And it was a report to the General Board of Health, sort of an inquiry into the sewage, drainage and supply of water and the sanitary conditions of the inhabitants of Haworth. And it's sort of, it's a report, and lots of statistics then I found really shocking. So the infantile mortality in Haworth, so we're talking about just in Haworth, was high, and it was 41.6% of infants in Haworth are going to die before they're 6.
Yeah.
So this is a lot. And the average age at death for the inhabitants of Haworth for the 12 years that the report covers was the age of 25. 25.8.
Yeah.
So, like, the conditions are pretty horrible.
Yeah.
And there's one quote that I've got here that kind of just describes the conditions. This is from the report. There are no sewers in Haworth. A few covered drains have been made in some of the streets to carry away the surface water, as for instance in the upper part of the main street and down Back Lane. But generally, the drainage runs along in open channels and gutters. As a necessary consequence of the want of sewerage, there is contiguous to each privy a receptacle for the night soil, in some cases walled round, in other cases fenced in with upright stones on edge. Into these midden steeds, so I'm just presuming it's where you chuck your shit, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just in case we were on different, got my best reading voice on as well. Anyway, into these midden steeds are thrown the household refuse and the offal from the slaughterhouses, where mixed with the night soil and occasionally the drainage from pigsties, the whole lies for months together. Decomposition goes on and offensive smells and putrid gases are given out. These midden steeds are uncovered and the majority of them are nearly full when I examine them. Bad as they are, their situation in close proximity to dwelling houses makes them much more injurious. Talking about the weather in relation to that, is put that it was stated to me that about 150 houses are dependent for their supply of water upon the head well, and that the supply from it is so scanty in summertime that in order to have water for the Monday's wash, the poor people are in the habit of going there at 2 or 3 o'clock on Monday morning in order to wait for their turn to fill their cans and buckets from the slowly running stream. It was also stated that the water of this well is very bad at this season and that it is sometimes so green and putrid that cattle which have been driven there to drink, after tasting the water, have turned away and refused to touch it.
Even the cattle don't want to drink it. Yeah.
Not going near it. So that's kind of insight into how wild it was here in Haworth.
I can't really imagine that, to be honest, and it's really different because Haworth I see on like top 5 most picturesque places to visit in the UK, and you see it and it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
so
yeah, it's lovely.
Completely crazy.
Yeah, it's completely different time, different
Yeah.
place, different conditions.
Yeah.
Like, how lucky are we now?
Yeah, so lucky, especially yesterday as well. Not so lucky today.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but at least it's not like gathering in great big green pools and like we're tiptoeing. You know, like, we're not tiptoeing through it.
And so thinking about what it revealed to you, this project, about the weather, because when people think of the Brontes, I think they think of dark clouds and rain and blistering winds. But was there anything that when you were doing all this deep research, did that prove that correct, or did you find something else?
Yeah, so I decided, so in my overcomplicated thinking, I wanted to make a little sculpture in the garden, and it was going to have, it was made out of recycled bits of stuff, and but I wanted 3 bells to ring when it was windy enough, a bike wheel sort of went round and just hit a bell, and then another one when it had rained enough and filled up this tube, it would tip, and then on return it rang a bell on its elbow, and then another one I just got this little washer on a little solar powered motor, and if it was sunny enough, it spun fast enough to just hit this bell. Okay, so in that I wanted the reference to the bells is obviously their pseudonyms, and I wanted to work out which sister would represent rain, which would represent sunshine, and which would represent the wind. And taking the 3 novels again, every time I found a weather reference, I took note of it. So all my books had masses and masses of sort of tags in.
And if you look on some of the handouts, you'll be able to see kind of the selection of the photos we're looking at. So feel free. They're like double-sided as well. So there is one with those books there.
And I then decided to put them into categories. Yeah. So obviously some of them are vague categories, vague-ish, but some of them are very particular. And I worked out the percentage of each sister's references. This sounds really, really complicated, but basically I made a colour wheel and put them into categories, chose a colour, and then worked out which sister mentioned, say, sunshine the most. So that's Anne. Anne actually mentioned sunshine the most in her novel compared to other weathers in her own novel. Yeah. And actually, all 3 Brontes mention fine, beautiful, sunny weather a lot. But of course, in a way, there's not the emotional turmoil and drama of a sunny day. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, like, actually, I think a lot of why we imagine the Brontes are more connected to windy, rainy, stormy, snowy, dreary weather is, of course, maybe that's when the storylines have their most dramatic turn, or so actually, in a way, they are more sunny, and frosty mornings, starry nights, all fine weather. But maybe we've edited that out of our sort of collective cultural representation of the Brontes.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
Anyway, so maybe films, book covers, our own experiences of the Moors. If you told me today, the Brontes mentioned sunshine loads, I'd be like, yeah, whatever. Yeah,
it's very true.
So it's like, I think that was quite surprising, actually, in a way, that they do mention lovely weather. Yeah. A lot.
Yeah, it's still surprising to me.
Yeah.
So thinking about the way that the landscape is affected by the weather, what were some of your findings on like the Brontes times compared to now? Or maybe compared to 2011, and then obviously now is a different story.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because so reading the Babbage report, he mentions weather records kept by this guy called Abraham Shackleton, I think. As you can see from here. Let me just in case I've got that wrong. Yeah, it's Shackleton. But he might be anyway, Mr. Shackleton of Braithwaite, so it's near Keighley. And there wasn't many people collecting records that still survive of that time daily of weather, but Shackleton was. And that's kind of interesting. I found that interesting because it turns out that the year that Bramwell and Emily died, and then of course that's kind of going into the next year where Anne died, it is the highest rainfall by quite a bit. And so I began to wonder, like, is there a connection between wet weather and TB? But, and of course at the time, TB wasn't recognised as being contagious. Nobody thought it was contagious. And there wasn't any cure for it. What was suggested was you went to a better climate, so hence Anne going to Scarborough for the better climate. I would say, I mean, what was interesting was, like, I wrote quite a bit about the whole project. And of course, this is 2011, and I've put in it, like, it's been said that climate change will be doing this and everything, and extreme weather episodes will get bigger in the future. And of course, like now, so we're now 12 years on. I mean, it's happening. I mean, if you think back only 11 years ago, I mean, obviously you'll get rhythms in all weather, and you'll get extremes within that. But the rise of extreme weather episodes is getting more and more and more. And I think just even as a normal member of the public, I can see that, if you see what I mean. You don't have to be a scientist to realise that actually the rain that we're getting, like, over the last couple of years, I live in Preston. I think it's one of the rainiest cities in the UK. All very proud of that. And but it, like, so I'm used to the rain, but like this last couple of years, it's just ridiculous. It's like, it's not just rain, it's like downpours like you've never had it before. And of course, your drains don't cope with it. And so flooding, localised flooding I feel is on the rise. Now, whether that's a general thing, is this one of those peaks? Will it get better? But science and study is suggesting no, this is it. We're in for the ride now, aren't we? We've been listening to the warnings for a long time, and have we done anything about it? I don't know. Yes, no.
And is those ideas of kind of like the landscape, the weather, environment important to your work and your artistic practice?
I think what's really interesting is that they're all interconnected, aren't they? So, like, although this is a project about the Brontes and weather, of course, it is about so many other things as well. It's about the landscape, and of course, the moorland landscape is a particular thing and vital to the health of the planet. Like, peat bogs are vital at sort of capturing carbon, and if we completely strip it, get rid of it, then the consequences of that, it's not just a windswept, boggy place that, you tramp across. The worth of these places, when they're just doing what they do, is far greater than we really collectively appreciate, if you know what I mean. We do know this. We know that if you chop down all the trees in upland areas, flooding happens downstream. You know what I mean? But it's like, maybe things are changing and we are doing more. But I would say that this project in particular, because I then understood those links between climate and weather with health and environment, like it's all one and the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of course, it feeds into every project that I do now, in a way.
Okay.
So it might not be absolutely about the weather, but of course, how can it not be, in a way? So if I'm making work about any landscape, you can't not consider the weather.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I agree. And then bringing it back to now, can you tell us a little bit about the weather book project that we've been doing?
Yeah, okay, so why we did this bit. So when I set up the digital weather station in 2011, it's all very well like collecting all this quite dry data, that's numbers and figures and that, but does that mean anything in a way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So at exactly the same time, I invited people from this very small area, I think Haworth, Oxenhope and maybe Pondon, maybe just a very small area. And we got 10 volunteers who then got a little weather kit, which was basically cards to fill in every day, but a little thermometer that did maximum and minimum temperature for the day. And they all promised to do it for a year. And I thought, well, if I've got like 2 or 3 of them at the end of the year, that'd be brilliant. But actually, they all stayed for the whole project. And obviously, they were sort of noting weather, but kind of I knew that the more that they did, they would bring into it their own personal lives. So they mentioned maximum minimum temperature, but they also mention how the weather has influenced them getting somewhere or not, or the wildlife they were seeing, how it's affecting them mood-wise. So of course it becomes this fantastic resource. And that between them they collected 2,334 cards of data. So really, that was almost far more interesting than the data collected with the digital weather station. But of course, I could use both. So with the Brontës describing these fictional sort of days in the novels, I would be like, right, so I'm looking for a day that then started like this, ended like that. They've mentioned how cold it is, and it's January. And so I could look through the data, but also, more importantly, I could really understand the weather through the Brontë weather collectors sort of information. And that was kind of one of the most lovely bits of the project. And sort of based on that, when you asked, should we do something again this year, we decided that might be one of the best ways of continuing the project, was putting out, rather than asking for 10 people to do it for a whole year, was actually do a comments book. So put a comments book out, and anybody visiting, if they felt so inclined, can write about the weather. So, and of course I could have just bought a comment book, but we decided let's do it really beautifully, have it hand bound, and also then I've chosen Brontë quotes for the front, but also in the book there are a few Brontë quotes to spur you on with your writing. I could read a couple.
Yeah, go for it.
Sounds quite good. I've changed my glasses again. So, okay, so this is the winter one. This is the one we've started with. And on the cover it says, "The earth was hard with a black frost, and the air made me shiver through every limb." And it's a quote from Wuthering Heights, Emily Brontë. And another one so one that I put in here, so it's just a plain book, obviously I've not put any comments in, it's for you to put your comments in. So, but occasionally there's a quote, and so there's another Wuthering Heights one, and it says, "The business of eating being concluded, and no one uttering a word of sociable conversation, I approached a window to examine the weather. A sorrowful sight I saw, dark night coming down prematurely, and sky and hills mingled in one bitter whirl of wind and suffocating snow." How beautiful.
Yeah.
And that, of course, sparks off the interest in the story, I suppose, being about, sort of being caught up at Wuthering Heights. And so that's the kind of quote that I've put in the book. And then Kevin from Leeds on the 4th of February put, "Not bad." Good old Kevin from Leeds. But obviously some people are terribly, terribly poetic and mention the Brontes and things like that. Let's go on to another one. That's not what I'm expecting from you when you write in the book later. So one of the quotes from Jane Eyre, Charlotte Brontë.
There you go.
It had been a mild, serene spring day, one of those days which, towards the end of March or beginning of April, rise shining over the earth as heralds of summer. It was drawing to an end now, but the evening was even warm, and I sat at work in the schoolroom with the window open. And each book I've sort of picked out, there's only about three quotes in each, 3 or 4, and then a different one on the front. This was the spring book-ish, spring-ish. The wind sighed low in the firs, and all was moorland loneliness and midnight hush.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
It's lovely. And Kathy from Pendle, seemed apt to read Kathy's out from Pendle, has put, this was 4th of May, yesterday's warmth has fled. Today has a bitter chill in the air, grey clouds overshadow, and everyone is missing the extra layer they left at home in optimism. Right. So that's a nice one. It's better than Kevin's, isn't it?
That's lovely. Yeah, I think, and we've got the recent book here, so we invite everyone at the end to come in and write their weather observations, whether that's today or for over the weekend, and just to contribute.
I think you can write about yesterday as well.
Yeah.
And maybe stargazing and the Drea.
Yeah, all of it in one, even though it's a little box, try and fit as much in as possible. So we're thinking about people's personal experiences and weather. How important do you think the weather plays in people's everyday lives and how they feel about the world?
I think whether you think of the weather or not, actually it does affect us in lots and lots and lots of different ways. Like practically it affects us, whether we're delayed going somewhere or you can't get the washing out, or what you wear, obviously. But also emotionally, I think obviously like a sunny spring day after a long winter is just so uplifting. And last night was really interesting. If you were there at the talk last night, they were saying that astronauts, when they come down to Earth, one of the first things they kind of want to be and do is in the elements, in the weather. Like that is, I suppose, our relationship with the world, maybe. I don't know. So it's vital to everything, and not just our sort of our physical selves, but our emotional selves as well, I think. And we all know after a really long, hard winter, we're just crying out. Dark nights that are, an early nightfall on some of those winter days can... But then, of course, then there's, if you get a crisp, frosty winter, or a crisp frosty day during that time can really just uplift you. And I think the Brontes do capture that a lot as well.
Yeah. Do you have a favourite weather?
Do you have a favourite weather?
Yeah.
Good question. Probably good question. A blowy, maybe. No, it needs to be sunny.
Sunny, yeah.
Sunny, blowy.
Yeah.
Maybe something like that.
That's nice.
When you're out walking and yeah. Maybe that.
Yeah, okay. We'll don't get much.
Not too hot, not too cold. One of them. Because we're British, aren't we? So it's like you everywhere you go, especially in spring and autumn, you've got an extra layer. You've got your umbrella. You've got your sun cream. You've got a hat. You've got your Mac in your bag, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've got shoes that could double up as sandals.
Yeah. It's so true.
Just in case.
Yeah.
So it's like we're ready for it.
Yeah. Overall, what do you think this project from 2011 and now has kind of revealed to you about the Brontes and weather?
It's really interesting because, of course, when I was looking for Bronte weather in the Bronte, the weather in the Bronte novels, I was like, well, maybe other authors mention the weather a lot. And, reading other books, I've looked for references of the weather and a lot don't. Actually, the Brontes do. Because, of course, leading up to this, I couldn't say whether anybody did or didn't, in a way.
Yeah.
And then concentrating on it, it was like, well, maybe it's just because I've not noticed. But then reading, say, for example, Thomas Hardy, who is very, they're of a particular place, and they're of a, in a particular landscape, but actually doesn't actually mention the weather as much as the Brontes do. And I think that shows how in tune they were with this particular place. Like, this place is where they were writing them, and this is the weather that they were mentioning. Yeah,
that's lovely. That's really nice. What do you find inspiring about the Bronte story?
That they were women, and that they were incredibly talented. You feel like they were all taken too soon, and maybe even better things could have come. Like Anne Bronte, for instance, I feel like Tenham to Wildfell Hall was is a great book, but maybe there could have been a better book. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you know? You never know. But like, just the way they wrote about landscape and how it made me look at landscape, I think it's been very inspiring. I mean, being a woman in the landscape now is still pretty. It's not everybody's. We're not entirely safe everywhere we go.
Yeah.
In which case, a lone woman in any landscape is a pretty daring thing. And it might be not daring to you, but it definitely is to a lot of people. So I think for the Brontes were daring.
Yeah.
Like, and it might have been a different time, and it might have not been as daring, but I have a feeling it probably was.
Yeah.
So I think their determination and courage is really admirable, and we should all channel our inner Bronte to be those daring women.
Totally. Well, it's been really lovely chatting with you. And one final question: what is around the corner for you? What projects have you got coming up?
Well, I've just spent Thursday, Friday installing work for the British Textile Biennial, and it just so happens that it's 25 windsocks on 5 metre tall poles, and the windsocks are all made from reclaimed festival tent material.
Wow.
So I went to Beat Herder Festival and to help clear up the tents afterwards with the charity. The charity goes in and collects usable tents.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for stuff you can't use. And it was absolutely the most horrifying thing that I have ever done. Just the waste. It was like, so leading up to it, I was like, oh, we're all really ecologically conscious now. Maybe I'll not get enough material and it was like I could have had anything I wanted, anything, any colour, any size. The charity couldn't collect enough of it because they're only given like a day and a half to do that, and then the rest goes to landfill. And so the wind socks, I made 25 wind socks out of discarded tents, but I could have made 4,000. Like, it was outrageous. But so it's sort of weather related and climate related, and so that's it. Sort of officially launches on Friday, and it's up for 5 weeks.
Amazing.
And it's at Townley Hall in Burnley, so part of the British Textile Biennial. So that's happening right now.
That's so exciting. Just down the road. I think you can get a bus from Keighley to Burnley. So
there you go.
Yeah, everyone
no
pop down.
Everybody, have a look. Yeah, it's free. It's free to see it as well. So.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Really appreciate you taking the time. And now we'll kind of open up for questions, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I've got a comment and a question, if that's okay.
Yes.
Just
if it's good.
Yeah. No, it's not good. But just to take you back to the link between weather and TB, if you think about the fact that we had the graveyard at the top, everybody was dying of TB and got buried at the top.
Yeah.
And then it'll get into groundwater. So
the Babbage report
I think it's in the Babbage report.
It is in the Babbage report about that, and how the gravestones were laid flat and not upright.
Exactly.
So it kind of created this sort of cap on the earth, but then any floodwater that did come through did just pretty much drain down to the rest of the village.
Yeah. We also had the abattoir right at the top of the hill as well, which was good planning.
Yeah. No, but we didn't know about those things until, or make those connections.
Yeah. But my question is about, you said that Anne wrote most about sun. What did Emily and Charlotte write most about?
So Emily became to represent wind, and Charlotte represented rain.
That's exactly how I would have guessed it.
And
I think,
if you look on your sheets, they've got the colour wheels on the back of one of them. So there's another one, you can share them around. Those are the colour wheels that Rebecca created.
And one of the colour wheels is in the exhibition in one of the cabinets. You can go and have a look at that.
That's the colour wheels there.
In the Brontës and the Wild exhibition, Women of the Wild. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
Oh.
I wondered, so you said you were surprised how much they wrote about sunshine, and you also mentioned, I can't remember the name, but a man in Braithwaite that was keeping accurate weather data.
Yeah.
Did you think that the novels were a fairly accurate representation of weather from the time, or that it was sort of...
That's a really good question. I didn't really then marry up Braithwaite's records, and when you see them, they are just ledgers full of numbers. They're incredible as documents. You can go, I think they're at Bradford Museums, aren't they? And you can request to see them, I'm sure. And but actually deciphering them is one thing, and wanting to is another, having the time to as well. Yeah. But I think so. Last night, one of the guys from Bradford Astronomical Society mentioned that Emily, throughout Wuthering Heights, was really in tune with the phases of the moon. And of course, to mention the moon, you're either mentioning that you can see it, as in there's clear sky or cloudy sky, or because you can't see it. And do you know what I mean? And I think we can only guess, but I would say they're writing about what they know. And if you live here, you do get that range of weather. You get thunderstorms, thunder and lightning. But of course, they also knew that their craft of putting a story together where, it starts off like a beautiful day, but ends with a violent storm. How will we ever know if that day existed? But maybe that's their craft and their brilliance in knowing that emotion and storytelling goes along with these rhythms, excuse me, and then, so I think a lot of it has to be from their imagination, but imagination rooted in knowing this place so well. But that's only a guess, in a way. Like before anybody's like, no, that can't be true. It might not be, yeah.
I think there was a question over here. Yes.
Right, thanks. I enjoyed that actually. The style's really, really nice, so thanks for that. I just wondered if you had any reflections on key incidents like the Crow Hill bog burst and how that affected their knowledge of weather.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Somebody called Ellen up here in a taxi for him outside.
Ellen? Taxi?
Show yourself.
No, I don't think so.
Right, he just asked me if I could read an answer.
No worries, thank you.
Anybody? No?
No?
Wait. Yeah, so Patrick Brontë does write a lot about instances in his diary. And so I think the whole family were well informed and understood the effects of certain things happening sort of regionally. But I mean, I think I'm going to mention something, you're all going to have to look it up. But I'm sure there was something like a volcano had gone off on the other side of the world during, and then it affected world weather patterns during that time. Somebody's nodding. Are you nodding? There's something, isn't there? Yeah. And I think even Patrick Brontë might mention it in his diary, something like that. So I think they're quite well informed of other things and how that might be affecting, regional, and how people were living, the effect it had. Yeah.
Great.
I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, I just
Kind
think
of.
young children that must have, I'm guessing, caught out at Pond must have had quite an influence on them.
Yeah.
I think also like being at the Parsonage and you're so connected to death there in a way as a family, as in you know your parishioners and you're burying an awful lot of them and understanding. I mean, I think the petition was from the people of Haworth to get the Babbage report commissioned in a way because everybody knew it had to be done to make the changes. So there was activism within that in a way.
Any other questions? Yes, Claire.
Thank you, I really enjoyed that. I just wondered, the only Brontë you haven't mentioned is Bramwell, and I wondered there if you even, like, was he part of any of your thinking, or... Was he, like, because I'm sure, like, obviously lots of poetry, and you mentioned his health, obviously, but I just wondered if you went near that, or if you kind of went, no.
Did I even consider it? I don't think I did, you know. That's terrible. What a confession. Sorry to...
It's okay, you can come back and do another project
I would
about
do-
Bramwell, right?
Well, you know.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, obviously, letters mention like his health, the health of all the family. So of course he sort of came into the project, but I didn't really find anything. Yeah, I admit now.
I just wondered what he would represent, and in your,
Oh, yeah,
connecting
good.
up the...
Yeah, all right.
Is this and Charlotte, is that? It'd be really interesting to see.
Yeah, it would actually, wouldn't it? Yeah. I've been caught out. I didn't consider it. Obviously, I considered, you know, because then I looked at Patrick's writing a bit. So, they sort of feed into it, but it really was about the Brontë sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One final question from anyone? Oh, I think we're done. Well, again, thank you so much, Rebecca, and we'd really love to have you come and contribute to our work as well. And that's the end of the festival. So thank you so much for coming. Really enjoyed having you all here this weekend, and get home safe. And thank you online for tuning in as well.
Fantastic, well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.